Usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is a very clear expectation of precision.
Right. Absolutely.
So, like, it operates a lot like engineering. You know, you break your arm, the x-ray shows that stark, jagged white line across the bone, and the doctor just points to the screen and says, well, there it is. That is the problem.
Yeah, broken or not broken. It's a clean, binary reality.
Exactly. We gravitate toward that kind of clarity. I mean, human beings find immense comfort in things that are visible, quantifiable, and just neatly categorized into a box of correct or incorrect.
Oh, for sure. We love putting things in boxes.
But the moment you step into the world of advanced language learning, and I mean, really advanced, that x-ray machine just completely shatters.
It really does. It's a totally different landscape.
Right. We find ourselves looking at a diagnostic landscape that is just entirely murky. Because when you are looking at true mastery of communication, there is no jagged white line on a scan to tell you if you are doing it perfectly or if, you know, your sentence structure is fractured.
There's no clear test for it anymore.
Exactly. So today we are wading into those diagnostic muddy waters for this deep dive. We're exploring a very specific, incredibly elusive threshold, the transition from having a high-level proficiency in English to achieving true C2 level mastery.
And this specific threshold haunts a massive number of learners. I mean, it's been years climbing this mountain of grammar and vocabulary.
Right, the endless flashcards.
Yes. They reach this plateau where they can understand almost everything, but they just hit a wall in their own expression.
Yeah.
They cannot figure out why the traditional methods of studying, you know, the flashcards, the grammar drills, the translation exercises, they just aren't pushing them forward into that realm of effortless fluency anymore.
So the mission for our deep dive today, and we're pulling from this really fascinating transcript of a language learning discussion we have on the desk, is to explore exactly why reaching that absolute highest echelon of language isn't about what most people think it is.
Right. It's a total misconception.
True mastery is not about memorizing the darkest corners of the dictionary.
No, not at all.
And it is not about flawlessly executing these pedantic, obscure grammar rules in real time. What we are uncovering today is that true mastery is actually a function of cognitive agility.
Cognitive agility, I love that term.
Yeah, it is about spontaneous eloquence and how the brain manages the sheer unpredictable chaos of a real-time conversation.
And adopting that perspective, it fundamentally changes how you approach every single interaction.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the core problem holding advanced learners back, we really have to look at a fundamental paradigm shift that has to take place in the learner's mind.
Yeah, that shift is crucial. Because when you begin learning a language, or, you know, even as you move through the intermediate stages, your entire worldview regarding that language is academic.
Like you're in school mode.
Exactly. The operating system of your brain is running a program designed to pass tests. You are actively trying to get the verb conjugation right.
Right.
You are mentally checking your noun genders, your prepositions, basically trying to avoid the metaphorical red ink on your spoken essay.
Yes, the red ink. We're all terrified of it.
But once you reach the upper echelons of language acquisition, that academic paradigm has to be entirely discarded.
The goalpost completely moves. At the C2 level, for you, the listener, whether you are actively mastering English or maybe trying to sharpen your corporate communication skills, or even just aiming to be a more articulate, persuasive force in your native tongue, the ultimate goal is no longer academic perfection.
Right.
The goal is the ability to respond to real-world stimuli spontaneously.
Because the real world doesn't give you multiple choice options.
No, it doesn't. You are taking in a messy, unpredictable situation. Maybe it's a sarcastic joke from a friend, or a sudden aggressive question from a client, or a highly nuanced political debate at a dinner party.
Yeah, and reacting to those stimuli requires an agility that a textbook simply cannot provide.
So to understand how to actually achieve that level of spontaneous eloquence, we have to examine the primary obstacle preventing it, right? The psychological and neurological trap that ensnares almost every advanced learner.
Yeah, and it's a big one.
The mental traffic jam.
The precise term we are looking at in the source material is cognitive overload.
Cognitive overload.
Yeah. If we step back and look at the underlying mechanics of working memory, the human brain only have a finite amount of processing power to allocate at any given microsecond.
Right, like RAM in a computer.
Exactly like RAM. Working memory is the mental workspace where we hold and manipulate information in real time, and its capacity is shockingly limited.
So paint a picture of what is actually happening in the learner's brain when they hit this overload, because we see them physically freezing in the middle of a sentence, just staring into space.
Oh, yeah. They freeze because their brain is attempting to execute two massively resource-intensive tasks simultaneously, which effectively crashes the system.
Oh, wow.
First, they are trying to architect a grammatically flawless sentence from the ground up. They are running through the internal rulebook to ensure the syntax is structurally sound.
Right, checking all the academic boxes.
Yes. And second, simultaneously, they are hunting through their mental lexicon for a highly sophisticated, high-level vocabulary word to ensure they sound smart or fluent.
So they are trapped in this internal monologue saying, okay, I need the past perfect continuous tense here to indicate an ongoing action that ended before another action in the past.
Right, doing all that math.
And I absolutely cannot use the basic word sad. I need to retrieve the word despondent or melancholy. And they are trying to compute all of this while another human being is staring directly into their eyes, waiting for a response to a simple question.
It's too much. The cognitive demand exceeds the available RAM in the brain. So you freeze, the output becomes robotic, you stutter, or the mind simply wipes itself blank in total panic.
It makes me think of this analogy based on the text. Operating a language this way is like trying to build a car from scratch on the factory assembly line every single time you just want to drive 3 blocks to the grocery store.
That is exactly it. And the inefficiency of that process is staggering when you frame it that way.
It is exhausting. You realize you are out of milk, but instead of just grabbing the keys to a finished car sitting in your driveway, your brain says, okay, first, we need to smelt the steel and weld the chassis. That is our foundational grammar.
Right.
Now we need to carefully install the transmission and align the gears. That is our syntax and clause structure. Now we need to mix the exact perfect custom shade of metallic paint. That is our advanced vocabulary.
And by the time you do all that,
by the time you have painstakingly built this entire vehicle, the grocery store is closed, the person you were talking to has checked their phone, and the conversation has completely moved on. It is a wildly inefficient way to navigate human interaction.
Which brings us to the crucial realization from the source text. Highly proficient speakers, including articulate native speakers, simply do not operate that way.
They don't.
No, they are not building sentences from scratch, word by word, welding the grammatical chassis every time they open their mouths.
So if they aren't building the car from scratch, how are they getting to the grocery store so fast? Like, what is the antidote to this assembly line nightmare?
The cognitive antidote discussed here is a mechanism known as chunking.
Chunking, okay.
Mastery involves relying heavily on prefabricated, highly flexible phrases that fit seamlessly into various contexts.
Prefabricated phrases. So they just have a fleet of cars already sitting in the driveway, fully built, keys in the ignition, ready to drive.
Exactly. A chunk in linguistics is a cluster of words that the brain stores and retrieves as a single cohesive unit, rather than as individual isolated pieces of vocabulary.
That makes so much sense.
Right. From a neurological standpoint, it takes vastly less cognitive energy to retrieve one single chunk from your memory bank than it does to retrieve 5 individual words, analyze their grammatical relationship, conjugate the verbs, and assemble them manually.
This shifts the entire landscape of how we view advanced fluency. Because, people tend to associate C2 mastery with giving profound, sweeping speeches at a podium or writing dense academic papers.
Oh, absolutely. The grand performance.
Right. But this chunking mechanism is actually most critical and most visible in everyday casual discourse.
And that introduces an incredibly vital concept regarding the actual purpose of everyday language. It is a concept from the text called phatic communion.
Phatic communion, it sounds like an ancient religious ritual.
It really does sound heavily academic, but the reality of it is deeply universally human. Phatic communion refers to the purely social function of language.
Okay, so what does that mean in practice?
It is the realization that the primary purpose of our daily interactions is very rarely the exchange of cold, hard, empirical data.
Right.
More often than not, the primary purpose is simply social grooming. It is building and maintaining rapport. It is the social glue that keeps human relationships functioning.
So we aren't exchanging information necessarily. We are exchanging acknowledgement. We are just signaling to each other, like, I see you. We are okay. We are part of the same tribe.
Exactly. That's a perfect way to put it. And learners who are trapped in that academic data exchange mindset almost universally miss this nuance.
Because they're stuck in test mode.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they have spent years being tested on their ability to convey precise vocabulary and exact grammatical structures, they treat every casual conversational prompt as a strict demand for precise data.
Oh, wow.
This is why they often sound overly formal, stiff, or robotic. An advanced speaker, however, has a deep intuitive grasp of phatic communion. They recognize instantly when a situation requires a squirt of social glue rather than a 3-page encyclopedia entry.
Let's ground this in a real scenario from the text because this is so relatable. Think about the most mundane, low-stakes interaction possible. A coworker passes you in the hall on a Monday morning and casually asks, "Hey, how was your weekend?"
Ah, yes. The classic phatic prompt.
Right. A learner trapped in the data exchange paradigm feels the pressure to perform. They might launch into this rigid, incredibly detailed itinerary.
Oh, I've heard this so many times.
Like they'll say, on Saturday at 9 a.m., I visited the farmer's market. The weather was highly favorable. I purchased 3 red apples and a loaf of bread. Subsequently, I returned to my dwelling.
And, grammatically, it is utterly flawless.
Right, but socially, it completely misses the mark.
Exactly. It violates the unwritten contract of phatic communion by overwhelming the listener with data they did not actually want. They just wanted to say hello.
So contrast that with how a true master handles that exact same hallway interaction. Instead of the robotic data dump, they deploy those prefabricated chunks we mentioned.
Yes, specifically they use what are known as mitigating phrases.
Right. A master might smoothly reply, I tend to keep things rather low-key these days. Or perhaps I've just been taking things as they come.
Let's dissect the mechanics of a chunk, like, I tend to keep things rather low-key these days. Because what stands out immediately is the total absence of complex SAT-level vocabulary.
There isn't a single difficult word in there. I mean, low-key is incredibly common slang. Tend is a basic verb.
But the architecture of that sentence is profoundly sophisticated.
Yeah.
It is understated. It flows effortlessly off the tongue precisely because it is a prefabricated chunk. The brain didn't have to build it, it just hit play.
Just hit play. I love that.
And most importantly, look at the psychological effect it has on the listener. It leaves massive amounts of room for the conversation to breathe.
It's an open door, not a wall of text.
Right.
By saying, I tend to keep things rather low-key, you are gently inviting the other person to relate to the universal feeling of wanting a relaxing weekend, rather than, forcing them to react to the hyper-specific timeline of your grocery shopping.
You are prioritizing the connection over the information. That is the essence of C2 mastery.
It's not about showing off.
No, it is not about sounding like a 19th century Victorian poet. It is about being incredibly smooth, adaptable, and hyper-calibrated to the social environment.
So if phatic communion is the social glue holding a casual weekend chat together, what happens when that glue has to hold a multi-million-dollar corporate relationship together?
Ah, yes, the stakes change entirely.
Which means the chunks have to evolve as well. This takes us directly from the hallway into the boardroom, looking at workplace diplomacy and the art of strategic hedging.
Because the true test of this linguistic agility is how these tools are deployed in high-pressure, high-stakes professional environments. When reputations, relationships, and careers are on the line, professionalism at a master level relies heavily on nuance, tact, and strategic linguistic deflection.
I'm going to put on my devil's advocate hat here for a moment, because I know there are listeners, maybe busy executives or project managers who are pushing back on this premise.
Sure.
Let's say I'm running a fast-paced tech startup. Time is quite literally money. If a colleague makes a glaring, costly error on a project, why in the world would I want to dance around it with nuanced, mitigating phrases?
It's a common question.
Right. Like, why would I waste precious minutes deploying tact? Isn't ultimate efficiency just walking over and saying, you completely messed this up, it is broken, fix it now, and moving on?
That instinct for brutal directness is incredibly common, especially in corporate cultures that, frankly, fetishize the idea of efficiency.
Yeah, the hustle culture.
Exactly. But relying on that blunt force is a fundamental misunderstanding of human behavioral psychology. Directness, especially in conflict, is almost always perceived by the human brain as a threat. It is abrasive.
So While I think I am saving 30 seconds of speaking time, I am actually doing long-term damage.
You are detonating a bomb in the working relationship.
Wow.
When you walk up to a colleague and say, "You completely messed this up," you trigger their amygdala. Their brain immediately enters a defensive fight-or-flight state.
Oh, so they aren't even hearing the business problem anymore. They're just reacting to the threat.
Right. Yes, you were linguistically efficient, but the emotional cost is catastrophic. The collaboration is dead. They will spend the next week actively resenting you, covering their tracks, or looking for ways to undermine you, rather than creatively solving the problem.
That makes total sense.
A sophisticated communicator understands that preserving the working relationship is the absolute prerequisite for long-term efficiency.
You cannot have efficiency if the machine is broken, and the machine is made of people.
Exactly.
So how does the master communicator handle that exact same scenario, the glaring colleague mistake, without triggering the fight-or-flight response?
This is where we see the strategic deployment of hedging, passive structures, and mitigating modifiers from the source text.
Let's break down those terms mechanically for a second before we get to the examples. What exactly is a mitigating modifier doing in a sentence?
A mitigating modifier is a word, often an adverb or adjective, whose sole grammatical function is to reduce the force, certainty, or severity of an utterance.
Okay.
Words like slight, rather somewhat, or a bit, they act as linguistic shock absorbers.
Linguistic shock absorbers. That's brilliant. And a passive structure.
A passive structure flips the normal syntax of a sentence so that the focus is on the action or the object rather than the person performing the action.
Sure.
So instead of the act, you broke the printer. The passive structure becomes, the printer was broken. It removes the active agent, which inherently removes the direct blame.
So let's look at the brilliant examples provided in the transcript for handling the colleague's mistake. Instead of the aggressive, "You completely messed this up," the C2 speaker deploys this chunk. It appears there's been a slight discrepancy here.
The psychological engineering in that single sentence is just a masterclass in diplomacy. Let's look at the opening. It appears.
It instantly removes the direct accusation.
Yes.
You are not saying, "You did this terrible thing." You are saying, "This mysterious phenomenon has just appeared before us." It creates emotional distance.
Then we have the mitigating modifier. A slight discrepancy. Notice it is not a catastrophic failure, an unforgivable error, or a massive blunder. It's a slight discrepancy.
It shrinks the problem down to a microscopic size. Like, it frames the issue as a tiny, manageable bump in the road rather than a mountain.
And the crucial question here is, does utilizing this soft language mean the master speaker is ignoring the actual problem?
Right. Are they just being a pushover?
Not at all. The problem is absolutely still on the table and needs to be fixed. But the psychological framing protects the ego of the colleague. It keeps their prefrontal cortex engaged in problem-solving mode rather than sending them into defensive panic.
There's another fantastic chunk from the text for conflict resolution. I think we might be operating on different wavelengths regarding this issue.
That phrase leans heavily on shared idiomatic understanding. Operating on different wavelengths is a brilliant structural choice because it distributes the responsibility equally.
It doesn't say, "You are entirely wrong and my perspective is entirely right."
Exactly. It frames the conflict as a mutual misalignment, a shared communication challenge, rather than a unilateral personal failure. It is incredibly diplomatic and instantly diffuses tension.
It is essentially using language to diffuse a bomb. Let's pivot to another universal corporate nightmare mentioned in the text: navigating delays. You are running late for a crucial meeting, or a deliverable is past deadline.
Right, the dreaded delay. The default setting for most people, including highly proficient native speakers, is to engage in incessant groveling apologies.
Oh, yeah. "I am so sorry I am late. I apologize for the delay. I am really, really sorry."
That feels like the right polite thing to do.
Yeah, you messed up. You should apologize.
It comes from a place of politeness, but if we analyze the power dynamics at play, over-apologizing puts you in an immediate position of weakness. You are begging for forgiveness.
Oh.
You are voluntarily lowering your own status in the social hierarchy of that interaction.
You are painting yourself as the incompetent subordinate. But the alternative strategy here completely flips the script. Instead of dwelling on their own failure, the master speaker shifts the spotlight onto the other person's virtue. The recommended chunk is, "I genuinely appreciate your patience. Things are taking slightly longer to culminate than anticipated."
The subtle shift in phrasing completely overwrites the tone of the interaction. You transition from being a guilty child begging for a pardon to a composed professional acknowledging a peer.
"I genuinely appreciate your patience." The psychology there is fascinating because it almost forces the other person to actually be patient. You are preemptively validating them.
It is a well-documented behavioral phenomenon. When you assign a positive attribute to someone, in this case, patience, human beings have a strong psychological compulsion to live up to that assigned trait.
Oh, wow.
If you thank someone for being patient, they're far less likely to instantly snap at you because they want to inhabit the virtuous role you just gave them.
That is almost like a Jedi mind trick. And then look at the second half of that chunk, which explains the delay. Things are taking slightly longer to culminate than anticipated.
Once again, we see the passive structure doing the heavy lifting. Things are taking longer, not I am disorganized and moving slowly. The abstract concept of things is responsible.
And the vocabulary choice of culminate, it is such an elegant, elevated word. If you say I'm running late, it sounds sloppy. If you say things are taking longer to culminate, it sounds like you are overseeing a highly complex, delicate operation that simply demands more time. You are managing the emotional state of your client entirely through prefabricated chunks of language.
Now, we have covered these prepared, strategic responses for common workplace minefields. You can memorize these chunks. You can keep them in your back pocket for conflicts and delays.
Right.
But the ultimate crucible for language mastery is what happens when you cannot prepare. What happens when you are completely blindsided?
Oh, the nightmare scenario. You are sitting in a boardroom, completely relaxed, and suddenly the CEO points directly at you and asks a highly complex question that you have zero preparation for.
That scenario separates the intermediate learners from the true masters. True linguistic mastery is not just about reciting prepared lines. It's about navigating total ambiguity without sacrificing your composure.
So how do you buy yourself time in those terrifying moments without resorting to those agonizing, prolonged ums, ahs, and ahs?
It's a real skill.
When you get hit with a surprise question and your brain is desperately scrambling to formulate an answer, you get that deer in the headlights look. I mean, it is exactly like a computer screen freezing while it tries to load a heavy program. You just stare at the spinning wheel of death.
Right.
How do advanced speakers make that mental loading screen look elegant?
I love the analogy of the spinning wheel of death versus a beautifully designed, sleek loading animation. The linguistic equivalent of that elegant loading animation is the use of discourse markers.
Break down exactly what a discourse marker is.
Mechanically speaking, a discourse marker is a word or a phrase that carries very little, if any, semantic meaning on its own.
Okay.
It doesn't actually add data or facts to your argument. Its entire function is pragmatic. It is a tool to manage the flow and structure of the conversation. Fluent speakers use discourse markers as verbal anchors to hold the floor while their brain catches up to their mouth.
So they are essentially signaling to the room, I have received your transmission, I am currently processing the data, and I am preparing to speak. Do not interrupt my loading process.
Exactly. It prevents the outward appearance of panic. It buys your working memory, those crucial 2 or 3 seconds, to actually construct a coherent thought, completely eliminating the dead, awkward silence.
Because silence feels like an eternity in those meetings.
It really does. The mastery is in using anchoring phrases that project immense confidence while you are internally scrambling.
Let's highlight the specific stalling tactics used by C2 speakers from the text because they are just pure gold. The first chunk is, that's a rather multifaceted issue. Let me think about how best to frame this.
The elegance of that stalling tactic is remarkable.
It is infinitely better than staring blankly and stammering. I don't know, give me a second to think.
Because it operates on a level of flattery. By stating, that's a rather multifaceted issue, you are implicitly complimenting the person who asked the question.
I didn't even think of that.
Yes. You are telling them that their inquiry is so deeply complex, layered, and intelligent that it requires serious, careful contemplation.
So you are validating their intelligence while simultaneously buying yourself 5 seconds of processing time.
It is a win-win. And the second half of the phrase, let me think about how best to frame this, implies something very specific.
What's that?
It suggests that you already have the answer in your head, but you possess so many sophisticated, nuanced ways to deliver it that you simply need a moment to select the absolute optimal phrasing. It masks internal confusion with an aura of total competence.
That is so slick. Another brilliant hedging chunk from the source is off the top of my head, I'd be inclined to say,
that specific chunk is a masterpiece of managing expectations.
because off the top of my head immediately signals to the listener that this is an initial, unpolished draft version thought. It gives you an automatic safety net if your subsequent answer ends up being slightly flawed or inaccurate.
Exactly. And following it with, I'd be inclined to say, further softens the assertion.
Right. You aren't stating an absolute immutable fact. You are simply stating a current inclination.
It leaves massive amounts of room to pivot gracefully later in the meeting if new information arises and you realize your initial thought was wrong. You are building a protective fortress around yourself entirely out of words before you even make your argument.
This level of precision and confidence, using the exact right phrase to manage a delicate social situation, it translates directly into how advanced speakers articulate emotion as well.
Articulating internal emotional states accurately is notoriously one of the most difficult challenges for any language learner because emotions are inherently abstract.
Yeah, when you only have a limited vocabulary toolkit, your emotional expression becomes entirely binary.
You are living in a world of extremes.
Right. You're either very happy or very sad, you're very stressed or very relaxed. But human psychology doesn't operate in primary colors. Emotion exists on a vast, infinitely nuanced spectrum.
And this is where the C2 master shines. They possess the linguistic paint box to articulate the exact, specific shade of their psychological state. Let's look at the spectrum of negative emotion, specifically stress.
Okay.
A beginner or intermediate learner feeling the pressure of a heavy workload will likely default to melodramatic extremes. They will sigh heavily and say, I am very stressed, or this is a disaster.
But the nuanced, advanced speaker tempers that extreme. They might use a chunk like, I've been feeling a bit overwhelmed, but I'm trying to keep things in perspective.
Look at the psychological balance achieved in that single sentence. The first clause, I've been feeling a bit overwhelmed, honestly validates the negative emotion.
It doesn't engage in toxic positivity.
No.
Yeah.
But the mitigating modifier a bit keeps it from sounding like a crisis.
And the second half, but I'm trying to keep things in perspective, immediately grounds the emotion. It signals to the listener that you possess emotional resilience.
Right.
It communicates that while the environment is difficult, you are still in the driver's seat. You are not totally defeated by the stress.
It is language that demonstrates high emotional intelligence. Another excellent alternative for expressing workplace burden is, it's been quite taxing, to be perfectly candid.
Let's dissect the word taxing here because it carries so much more weight than simply saying I am busy.
Taxing implies a very specific type of burden. It evokes the idea of a slow depletion of resources, a heavy toll being extracted over time.
Yeah.
It communicates a deep systemic exhaustion rather than just a temporarily full calendar.
And appending to be perfectly candid at the end of the thought acts as a powerful social lever. It signals vulnerability.
It does.
It tells the listener, I am pulling back the professional curtain and letting you in on my honest, unfiltered state. It deepens the interpersonal trust and connection.
And this extreme precision applies equally to positive emotions. Imagine a scenario where you are presented with a new design concept or a pitch that you really like. The basic default response is simply, I love it.
Which is perfectly fine, it gets the point across. But it lacks any real depth. It is the chunky crayon version of a beautiful oil painting.
A master communicator, however, might articulate that positive reaction by saying, I'm genuinely drawn to that concept. Or, for a stronger reaction, that resonates with me on a rather visceral level.
That resonates with me on a visceral level. That chunk packs an incredible punch.
The power lies in the word visceral. Etymologically, it relates to the viscera, the internal organs.
Oh, wow, right. The literal gut.
It means you are feeling something in your literal gut rather than just appreciating it with your intellect. By using that specific phrase, you are communicating a profound, almost physical alignment with the idea being presented.
It is vastly more impactful, memorable, and persuasive than simply saying, I love it.
Absolutely.
It is the difference between hearing a catchy pop song on a cheap radio and sitting in the front row for a live symphony orchestra. The notes are infinitely more complex, the resonance is deeper, the experience is richer. Having these vast spectrums of emotion at your disposal means you have the power to be precisely understood by the world, not just roughly estimated.
However, accumulating all of these complex high-level tools, the mitigating phrases, the diplomatic hedges, the discourse markers, the nuanced vocabulary of emotional spectrums. It can inadvertently create a very dangerous psychological trap for the learner.
Here is where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yes.
We have just spent, this whole time outlining this seemingly impenetrable, flawless, highly polished method of speaking. We've talked about effortlessly navigating conflict, elegantly handling delays, and articulating profound psychological states.
Right.
But analyzing the core of this transition to mastery reveals a deliberate and honestly highly ironic pivot in the source material.
It directly confronts and deconstructs the ultimate final roadblock that prevents advanced learners from crossing the threshold into true fluency.
Because the final hurdle to becoming a master communicator isn't what most people think it is.
The foundational assertion here is quite profound. If you are a learner listening to this deep dive and you are easily comprehending this complex dialogue, if you inherently grasp the subtle differences between taxing and overwhelmed or the diplomatic weight of a slight discrepancy, then your syntax, your grammar, and your vocabulary are already phenomenal. You already possess the necessary tools.
The academic hurdle has already been cleared. You have passed the test.
Exactly. The wall you are currently hitting is no longer academic. It's no longer about needing more flashcards. The wall is entirely psychological.
It is the deeply ingrained false belief that C2 mastery means never, ever making a mistake. It is the pervasive myth that native speakers, or true communication masters, speak in perfectly formatted, unbroken, grammatically flawless paragraphs that could be transcribed directly into a university textbook without a single edit.
It is crucial to heavily emphasize the reality of how native speakers actually operate, as mentioned in the text. If you record and transcribe any casual conversation between highly educated, articulate native speakers, it is a mess.
A total mess.
It is littered with hesitation. They self-correct constantly. They abandon sentences halfway through. They rephrase mid-thought. They stumble over their own tongues.
We are doing it right now. In every single unscripted conversation, human beings start a thought, realize their brain is taking it in the wrong direction, and they awkwardly pivot. The illusion of the flawless, unbroken speaker is a complete myth.
But language learners hold themselves to that mythical, impossible standard. And that pursuit of absolute perfection is exactly what triggers the crippling cognitive overload we discussed at the very beginning of this deep dive.
They freeze because they are terrified of the stumble. They view the stumble as a failure.
But masters do not freeze. They stumble, but they recover gracefully.
The examples of graceful self-correction in the source are just vital to study. A master might be halfway through a tangled, messy explanation, realize they have painted themselves into a grammatical corner, and instead of panicking or going silent, they just pause, smile, and deploy a chunk like, actually, let me recalibrate that thought. Or what I'm essentially trying to articulate is,
what's fascinating here is the philosophical core of what true fluency actually represents. Self-correction is not a sign of weakness. It does not indicate that you have a poor grasp of the English language or deficient communication skills.
it is the exact opposite.
Precisely. Self-correction is the definitive hallmark of a dynamic, highly active mind navigating a complex linguistic environment. By pausing a messy sentence and saying, "Let me recalibrate that thought," you are demonstrating high-level metacognition.
Define metacognition for us in this context.
Metacognition is essentially thinking about your own thinking. In language, it means you are actively analyzing your own verbal output in real time as it leaves your mouth, judging its effectiveness, realizing it is suboptimal, and adjusting it on the fly to be more precise.
Wow.
That requires immense cognitive processing power. That is the true definition of mastery.
It actually makes you sound significantly more intelligent and engaged to catch your own mistake and correct it elegantly than it does to speak like a pre-programmed robot that never makes a mistake at all.
Absolutely.
Recalibrate that thought is such a beautiful phrase. It makes it sound like your brain is a highly sensitive, complex scientific instrument that you are actively tuning.
Because you are. Your communication is the most complex instrument you own. And to truly reach that C2 level of fluency, or to become a master communicator in your native tongue, you must completely relinquish the desire for absolute rigid perfection.
Because rigidity is brittle. When a rigid system encounters an unexpected obstacle, it breaks. What you must strive for instead is authentic connection and adaptability.
Authentic connection. Which brings this entire exploration full circle right back to the concept of phatic communion we discussed at the start.
A social glue.
Yes. The ultimate purpose of the language is not the flawless transmission of data. It is the construction of a bridge between you and another human being. If you stumble a few times while building that bridge, if you drop a hammer or use the wrong nail, it does not matter, as long as the bridge ultimately gets built and the connection is made.
That is the perfect synthesis of the overarching takeaways we've uncovered today.
I agree.
So, as we bring all of this together, what does this mean for you, the listener? We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with the neurological mechanics of cognitive overload and the necessity of chunking.
Right.
We explored the anthropological social glue of phatic communion in everyday discourse. We navigated the dangerous minefield of corporate diplomacy, dissecting passive structures and mitigating modifiers. And finally, we looked at the psychological liberation that comes from shattering the myth of perfection and embracing the elegant stumble.
The ultimate unifying lesson to draw from all of this is that fluency, true, advanced C2 level mastery is an evolving identity. It is not a static certificate that you print out, frame on your wall, and say, I am done forever, I have conquered language.
It is a living, breathing skill set that is forged in the fires of actual, sometimes messy, sometimes awkward, real-world interactions. You absolutely cannot master this by sitting alone in a quiet room highlighting a grammar textbook. You have to get out into the world and get messy.
To help you make that transition, there is a very specific, actionable call to action, a piece of homework for you, the listener, which I think is brilliant in its simplicity and accessibility.
The golden rule here is that consistency always trumps intensity. Do not try to memorize a dictionary of idioms this weekend.
Please do.
Do not try to radically overhaul your entire personality and communication style in your Monday morning staff meeting. That will only lead to more cognitive overload.
The instruction is to simply take one thing. Select just one single mitigating phrase, one diplomatic hedge, or one discourse marker that we unpacked today.
Maybe it's the phatic phrase, I tend to keep things rather low-key.
Or maybe you want to try the conflict diffuser. It appears there's been a slight discrepancy.
Or maybe you just want to practice the elegant stumble with, let me recalibrate that thought. Take that one single phrase and make it your mission to organically weave it into a live conversation or an email at some point this week. Just one time.
Start incredibly small and let the habits compound over time. Let that one prefabricated chunk become deeply embedded into your automatic subconscious toolkit.
Because as those chunks slowly compound month after month, the cognitive load on your working memory decreases, your capacity for spontaneous eloquence increases, and that evolving identity of true, effortless fluency begins to take permanent shape.
Which leaves us with a truly fascinating place to wrap up. We started this hour by talking about the medical X-ray, that deep human desire for a clean, binary, black and white diagnosis of perfect or broken.
Right.
But if we fully accept the reality we've explored today, that true fluency is an evolving identity forged in unpredictable, messy interactions, and that it inherently relies on a process of continuous, real-time self-correction. This raises a lingering and perhaps deeply provocative question for you to mull over as you step back out into the world. If absolute communication mastery requires us to constantly recalibrate our thoughts in real time, perpetually reacting to ever-changing, infinitely complex human contexts, does that mean we never actually finish learning a language?
Oh, wow.
Do we never reach a final static state of flawless perfection, but rather we just continually evolve into more complex, more empathetic, more nuanced versions of ourselves within it?
A profound question without a clean binary answer, which is exactly how a deep dive should end. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration. We will catch you on the next one.